Hello everyone. In this video I would like to discuss the ongoing Russian-Ukrainian war from the point of view of the law, but not international law, not even Ukrainian law. I will be discussing this war from the point of view of the law of Russian Federation. And before I begin, I would like to state the obvious, namely, common citizens may do anything that is not explicitly prohibited by the law, but state officials are allowed to do only what is explicitly authorized by the law. This is the foundation of the whole concept of the rule of law. It is the difference between freedom and power. Citizens, by default, are free, but the state, by default, is restricted by own laws. And this principle is exactly what makes Russian annexation of Ukrainian territory legally impossible, even within Russia's own constitutional framework. So when a private person acts, they are exercising their own freedom. When a state official acts, they are exercising public power. This power can restrict other people's rights, impose obligations, even use force. But in return, the state must follow own laws to the letter. Otherwise, the actions of the state representatives are illegal. The law which is above all laws, the foundation of all laws, is the constitution of the state. Constitution sets the rules which are binding on the entire government. This principle exists in all countries, in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, in Ukraine, and even in Russia. Specifically, let's look at the actual constitutional mechanism that Russia claims to have followed when Russia occupied Ukrainian Crimean Peninsula. Article 65 of the Constitution of Russian Federation. Article 65, here it is. It is taken from the website constitution.ru, Russia. Article 65 has two clauses. The first part lists the subjects of Russian Federation. The second part of Article 65 says the following, and I translate. So, the admission to the Russian Federation and the creation of a new constituent, entity, that's better, within Russian Federation are carried out in accordance with the procedures established by the federal constitutional law. So there is a federal constitutional law that establishes those procedures. Let us look at the federal constitutional law. Here it is, taken from the website pravo.government.gov.ru. Federal constitutional law. No, not this one. This one, yes, here. On the admission into the Russian Federation and the creation in its as its part of a new subject of the Russian Federation, something like that. Specifically, I am looking at Article 4. Article 4, Part 2. So here it is, founded. The admission of a foreign state or part thereof into the Russian Federation as a new subject is carried out by mutual consent of the Russian Federation and the given foreign state in accordance with an international and explained interstate treaty on the admission of a foreign state or part thereof into the Russian Federation as a new subject, hereafter referred to as the International Treaty, concluded or signed between the Russian Federation and the given foreign state. So how does this principle apply to annexation of Crimea? According to this law, there should have been a treaty between Russian Federation and Ukraine, whose part was Crimea, about the transfer of Crimean Peninsula from Ukraine to Russian Federation. Such a treaty doesn't exist in nature. It has never been signed, never has been ratified. So, according to the Russian own law, this transfer, annexation of Crimea by Russian Federation is illegal. How Russia tried to bypass its own federal law? So we need to understand how Russia tried to justify this violation of law. So Russia had no agreement with Ukraine and therefore no lawful way to change the list of subjects in the first part of Article 65 of its constitution. So Russia tried to bypass this law by manufacturing the conditions required by Article 4 of the Federal Constitutional Law of 2001. And here is the sequence. Step 1. Russia occupied Crimea militarily. Now, Russian troops were stationed in Crimea, but that was legal, that they were stationed there following the Russian-Ukrainian mutual agreement. They were supposed to stay within certain territories and not allowed to step outside of those territories. They were allowed only to remain in Russian bases in Crimea. And this video shows how this transfer actually happened. This is the parliament of Crimea. These people are the Russian military personnel. They have seized the parliament of Crimea. They have expelled the Ukrainian police from the parliament. Okay, these are the Russian soldiers inside the parliament. They have lowered the Ukrainian flag. They have raised the Russian flag over the Crimean parliament. Here they are again. These are Russian military personnel. They have forced the deputies of Crimean parliament to call for a referendum. And the referendum, the so-called referendum, did take place, I believe, on March 14th of 2014. On the 17th of March 2014, Russia issued a presidential decree in which Russia recognized Crimea as a sovereign and independent state. this recognition was not accepted by Ukraine or by any other country, but Russia needed this to satisfy Article 4 of its own constitutional law that I quoted a few minutes ago. Immediately after recognition, Russia claimed that this newly formed independent state had formally asked to join Russian Federation, and on March 18, 2014, Russia signed the Treaty of Accession, adding Crimea to the list of subjects in Article 65. And Russia repeated the same pattern in the year 2022, February 21st, just before starting the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Russia did the same thing with Donetsk and Luhansk regions of Ukraine. Now let us give the devil his due. Let us accept that Russia was right, and on the 17th of March 2014, Crimea was an independent state. Even if we grant that premise, the entire legal mechanism collapses because this so-called state had no constitution of its own, no legal system of its own, no legislature of its own, no sovereign power, no civil code, no criminal code of its own, no treaty-making procedures. These laws, these things are created not in a few hours. They are created after months of work in the parliament of an independent state. Crimea simply didn't have time to create all these things, constitution, legislature. So by what law did Crimea ask for accession to Russian Federation? Ukrainian law, but Ukrainian law does not allow that. Russian law, formally, technically, Crimea was not part of the Russian Federation, so Russian law does not apply either. Crimean law, but Crimean law didn't exist, and it never existed in practice. So Crimea had no law that allowed to request accession. A state without laws cannot request accession, cannot sign treaties, cannot authorize annexation, cannot dissolve itself. Even inside Russia's own legal fiction, Crimea could not legally ask to join Russia, could not legally sign the Treaty of Accession, and could not legally become a subject of Russian Federation. Russia's annexation of Crimea was impossible even under Russian own constitutional structure. Now, Donetsk and Luhansk regions, the so-called Donetsk People Republic and Luhansk People Republic. Russia repeated the same recognition pattern with Donetsk and Luhansk. Unlike Crimea, these entities had formally declared independence in 2014 and had adopted their own constitutions and laws. But under the international law, these documents have no validity because both territories were under Russian military control. And an occupied territory cannot be a sovereign state. Such entities simply have no legal capacity to sign treaties or transfer territory. So their request for accession was legally impossible. Russia claims 4 regions of Ukraine: Crimea, Luhansk region, Donetsk region, Kherson region, and Zaporizhia region. We have discussed the first 3. Now, with Kherson and Zaporizhia, things are even simpler because Russia didn't even pretend to follow any legal procedure whatsoever. There was no recognition of their sovereignty. These regions never declared sovereignty. They never declared independence. They never made a request to join Russian Federation. So this was a plain attempt of annexation. So even if we grant Russia's premise of independence, the argument fails because recognition under occupation is legally void. A state without legitimate sovereignty cannot authorize accession. Crimea, Donetsk, Luhansk had no legal capacity to request admission into Russian Federation. And Kherson and Zaporizhia simply never declared independence, even formally, even on paper, and they never, the whole legal mechanism was skipped by Russia. So Russian annexations contradict the structure of the Russian federal constitutional law of 2001. From the perspective of the international law, things are simple. So international law reinforces that annexation by force. I am quoting Article 2 of the United Nations Charter. So Article 2, Clause 4, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. All right, so plain and simple. Annexation by force is prohibited by the United Nations Charter. Occupied territories cannot be declared independent by the occupying power. Referendums under military occupation have no legal validity. Both Russian constitutional law and international law point in the same direction. Once we established that the annexations violate Russia's own constitutional structure, we reach an unavoidable conclusion that Russia is waging a classical, aggressive, territorial war. And here is the striking part. Russian own criminal code criminalizes this behavior. Specifically, I am referring to Article 353 of the Criminal Code of Russian Federation. Here it is. Article 353 of the Criminal Code. Part 1. Planning, preparing, or initiating or unleashing of an aggressive war is punishable by imprisonment for the term from 7 to 15 years. Part 2. Conducting an aggressive war is punishable by an imprisonment from 10 to 20 years. So, Russian own criminal code defines Russian actions as criminal. And this raises an important question. If the president of a state violates the constitution and wages an aggressive war, is he still legally the president? Under the Russian procedure, legally, the answer is yes. Vladimir Putin is still the president of Russian Federation because the removal procedure requires the consent of the State Duma, the Federal Council, the Constitutional Court, and the Supreme Court. But these institutions are controlled by the president, by Putin. So legally, yes. Putin is president de facto. But he is not the president of de jure, not in law. He is exercising raw power, but he doesn't have a lawful authority. He is serving unconstitutionally. By the way, he has served 4 terms, despite the original limit of 2 terms. Because the original constitution of the Russian Federation was clear that no person may serve more than 2 presidential terms. And Putin has served 4. In 2020, so 6 years ago, the constitution of Russia was amended to reset his previous terms. And now he is allowed legally, under the new edition of the constitution, to remain in power until, if my memory is correct, 2036. So this is a textbook example of constitutional usurpation. So we now have a complete picture. The constitution's territorial mechanisms were bypassed. The criminal code prohibits aggressive war, and it has been violated by the Russian state. And Putin has usurped power. He has eliminated his previous terms somehow magically. So in Russia, there is no constitutional governance. It is the transformation of a state into an instrument of personal power of Vladimir Putin. Back in 1946, I believe, at the Nuremberg trials, the Soviet prosecutor Roman Rudenko has made a statement about the Nazi regime. They are criminals who have turned the state itself into an instrument of own crimes. And the same can be said about Russia, today's Russian Federation. Russia turned into an instrument in the hands of the criminals. When leaders violate own constitution, wage aggressive war, place themselves above the law, they transform the state. It is the definition. They transform the state from a legal institution into a tool of unlawful criminal power. And Russian war against Ukraine perfectly fits this pattern. If Russia's war is illegal even under Russian law, then Ukraine's self-defense against that aggression is justified, it is legal even under Russian law. Ukraine is fighting a defensive war, a war to protect its people, its land, its freedom, its sovereignty. And if you want to support Ukraine's just defense, I urge you to donate to Ukrainian armed forces. My personal favorite is Magyar Birds, one of the most effective units within the Ukrainian army. Your support genuinely saves lives. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.